Hi there, I'm Sue Stockdale, your host for the podcast. Our aim is to provide you with inspiration through conversation. You won't find celebrities in this podcast, but you will find amazing people, including explorers, entrepreneurs, and environmentalists. Each of their amazing stories has the power to strengthen, shape, and challenge our views of the world. I hope the conversation ignites new possibilities within you, makes you think and behave differently as a result of listening to them. You may not know our podcast is not for profit, which means that we don't aim to make money from this, but we do want to measure the impact that it has on you, our lovely listeners. What are you inspired to do by listening to these episodes? We've created a short 3-minute survey which you can link to in the show notes, and we'd love to know what effect this podcast has. And you can leave us a voice note too if you prefer. All the information you'll find and links on the show notes and on the website. Well, today's guest, I'm really looking forward to speaking to. Her name is Jenna Howieson, and she discovered her identity through travel and her career calling by being curious. She now educates others about LGBTQ+ in her role as a diversity, equity and inclusion professional. She runs an LGBTQ+ travel blog called The Jenna Way, where she shines a light on the nuances of travelling and living as a queer person in today's world. I learned a lot from Jenna about inclusion, including how we should ask guests for their pronouns at the start of each conversation. Jenna says that we should not be afraid to slip up because we are all humans and sometimes we do use the wrong language. The most important thing is to recognise the person's intent behind what they communicate. Well, I hope you enjoy what she has to say. Welcome to the podcast, Jenna.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's really lovely to speak to you today, and I'm intrigued to learn all about your interests in travel and about your blog and about you as a person. The first bit of research that I did, Jenna, was look at your travel blog, and you describe yourself there as authentic, queer and unstoppable. And it was making me think that COVID times, perhaps the unstoppable was a bit of a challenge. Something else stopped you. How did you cope with COVID times?
Yeah. So I think I have unstoppable there in my tagline, probably as a reminder to myself as much as anything that I can do anything and I can achieve whatever I want to achieve. But yes, in the very real sense of the word, travel has not been so possible for the last year or so. For the last, particularly 4 or 5 years, traveling has been such a massive part of my personal brand and my personal identity. And it's been a lot of how I've shaped a lot of my decisions, a lot of the choices I made around where I studied, and then also sort of the career path that I chose. And so for the world to come to a halt and for travel to not be possible, it was certainly a massive adjustment for me to then try and figure out what on earth am I going to do with all of my time, because I didn't spend a lot of it at home before. So yeah, there was definitely a moment of sort of personal identity crisis where I realized that I shaped so much of who I was around the travels that I did. And it was also pretty much all that I wrote about on my blog. And that was where I poured my energy. There was definitely a low moment or two, and then tried to reframe the opportunities that I did have whilst international travel wasn't possible. I'm based in Scotland, I'm based in Edinburgh, and I've spent a lot of time discovering my own back garden. So Edinburgh has some stunning scenery in the Pentland Hills and in the sort of surrounding areas, which I've found great joy and passion in exploring. And even the north of Scotland, travelling up there, which is somewhere I probably would never have gone if a plane had been an option, if I'm honest. So it definitely took a bit of adjustment for me to realise that there was more to life than hopping on a plane every weekend. But I've actually poured a lot of my energy recently into DIY, and we're now converting a van into a camper van. So that has been a massive new challenge. So it's just been about realizing that there's always challenges and always new opportunities and adventures. They just look very different.
Well, I can imagine in times to come, there'll be a whole bunch of other conversations to have around where that camper van takes you. Yes. But that's for another time.
Another day.
So thinking of that concept of journey, I'm curious to dig a little bit deeper into your personal journey and what your aspirations were when you were a youngster and how has your career evolved? Because my sense is that really you have created a career around what is important to you.
Yeah,
tell us more.
When I was a child, I really wanted to be a radio DJ. So in many ways, my dreams are coming true today. This is my very first podcast. But moving on from my early days, when I left school, I did really well in school and got really great grades. And so the options that were presented to me from the sort of adults or teachers in my life at that time were kind of law or medicine. And being incredibly squeamish and terrible at science, the obvious option seemed to be law. And so I sort of dove into doing a law degree without really much research into what was involved in that or whether it was actually really the right choice for me. I did law for 4 years. My choice of where to study was heavily influenced by whether or not I could study abroad. So I think from an early age, the ability to travel really trumped anything else. And I did study abroad in my 3rd year in Holland. So that was definitely the peak of my study. But I pretty much had confirmed to myself by year 2 of my law degree that it was not the space for me. It was not the environment that I wanted to be in or the career that I wanted to have. And so once I left university, I took a bit of time out to, surprise, surprise, go traveling. I think it speaks for itself that I didn't actually attend my graduation because I chose to spend the summer in America instead. So I definitely chose sort of passion over what I felt was expected of me by society at that time. After I graduated, spent that summer in America and then went to Vietnam and spent 6 months in Vietnam teaching English, which I think is quite a classic sort of gap year style thing to do. Once I returned to Edinburgh, that was where I sort of thought, okay, now what am I doing? Because a lot of the friends I had studied with were deep into their law careers and getting jobs. So I thought, okay, I need a job. So I did a lot of temp work, just admin, very short-term work around Edinburgh. Kind of fell into a 6-week contract at a travel company. So it was an admin job, but at least it had that link to travel. So I thought, okay, I could do this for 6 weeks. And that role just kind of evolved and evolved into eventually becoming a permanent role. And I became a permanent member of the team in that organisation. The role was pretty far removed from my law degree, but it was at least in the sector that I had an interest in. And it was whilst I was there that I also was sort of in my personal life at the same time, I guess alongside that was coming to terms with myself a little bit more, starting to discover my own identity and including the fact that I was a member of the LGBT community. And so those two parts of my journey happened all very much at the same time. And as I became more and more comfortable in that organisation, that was when I started to sort of test the waters with close friends and colleagues about sort of sharing that part of my personal identity as well. And really the career that I'm in now kind of accidentally stemmed from there.
It seems to me that journeying and travel and discovering new things is actually what you're putting into practice in your work life as well as your personal life. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm always open to new things, new experiences, new adventures, and discovering new bits about myself. I think travel brings so much opportunity to discover your identity, whatever that looks like, whether it's being LGBT or just other parts of your personality or hobbies. I also identify as an introvert, and I think that that's an interesting combination to be someone passionate about solo travel, but also very introverted. And so I think travel just gives that scope for discovery in the very literal sense of seeing new places around the world, but also self-discovery of learning more about yourself as well.
Now, one of the words you just slipped into the conversation there, Jenna, was around solo travel.
Yes.
Because I'm imagining people might have assumed that you're traveling with others. For many people, that can be quite daunting. It can be quite a risk. How have you had the courage and the confidence to do that?
I think I've always been a very independent person and I was raised to be confident. I also was raised with a brother, so I learned to stand my ground early on. And so I think that for me, I've just always had that mentality that you don't need someone else to be able to do something. You can do that for yourself. And that's really where my solo travel journeys began. I wasn't going to wait around at home for someone else to come with me before I got to see the world. I was going to do it and see who I met along the way and see what happened along the way. So I guess my first big solo travel adventure would have been my year abroad, where there was a stability and structure around it because, you were going to another university. There was kind of framework in place for support. And then as I grew more confident in my traveling, I started to do it really off my own back and going completely solo, booking my own flights, choosing where I was going to go. And I just found that that was such a freeing experience to have complete control and autonomy over where I went, what I did, when I ate, where I chose to visit, the whole thing. It was such a freeing experience and so empowering as well. So that's actually where my travel blog came from originally. It was not intended to be about speaking about LGBT travel. It was really, I started the blog to encourage other women specifically, because I think there's that solo female traveller niche of encouraging other women to take control of their own decisions and to have the courage to go out and adventure the world themselves. And that's really why I started to share the travel that I was doing online.
And within that blog and from your own experiences, what have been some of the hardest things you've faced and how have you overcome them?
I would say my most challenging adventure by far was Vietnam, my journey to Vietnam. for 6 months, it certainly brought many a challenge. Vietnam is an absolutely gorgeous country, wonderful people, wonderful culture. I had an incredible time, but also a very challenging time. I was there on the other side of the world, very isolated in a country that I couldn't speak the language. I didn't have many friends. And with the teaching schedule that I was on, it was far more constricted than just being there as traveling, because not only was I traveling and exploring, but I was also trying to work. And so there's a whole new set of things to navigate when you try to work abroad and you're not just on holiday sitting by the beach. So for all the wonderful opportunities that Vietnam has to offer, it was definitely a challenging place to try and work and find accommodation, navigating the language barriers and very much cultural differences with what I was used to at home. That taught me a lot about myself, that I had the resilience to not quit, because there was definitely days when I was lying in a very, very cold 1-bedroom flat that I definitely wanted to be home, eating my super noodles that I'd made out of a kettle because I didn't have a kitchen. There was a lot going on there and I didn't quit. And I think coming out the back of that, I always think to myself, if I stuck it out in Vietnam, I can get through anything. And that's something that stayed with me.
So you faced the challenges on those travels. What have been some of the wonderful places that you've visited? What are the highlights that stay in your head?
Oh, everywhere definitely has its perks. It's hard to pick out. As a Scottish girl, I love anywhere that has a sunshine, which is basically anywhere except Scotland. So I will say that that's always great. For me, Thailand sticks out. It's not somewhere I traveled solo, it's somewhere I traveled with my partner. But as I've come into my LGBT identity and started to speak about that more, it's become really important to me as well to highlight and celebrate the countries that are very inclusive and that are super welcoming to LGBT travellers. So Thailand is always top of my list when I'm celebrating the countries that I've had really positive experience in. We felt completely welcomed. We felt incredibly safe. It's such a gorgeous country. And we also learned to scuba dive. So being able to see not only the land of Thailand, but the under the sea of Thailand as well was such a fantastic experience. And I think the cherry on the cake with Thailand is that we went in January of 2020 on a very spontaneous last minute trip. And I think someone was looking down on us to encourage us to book a very spontaneous trip in January, because the world shut down very soon after. And we always look back to say, we're so grateful we just took that random trip. There was no special occasion. There was no real reason to go, but we just thought, why not? And I think that that is a lesson I learned from COVID as well, to take the opportunities when they present themselves, because you don't know when they're not going to be available again. So I will be forever grateful for Thailand.
The conversation continues in a few seconds after this. If you are a busy person and probably always feeling behind, then you may be wondering how you can get more done in less time. One solution is working with a virtual assistant. They can help with social media, graphic design, customer service, copywriting, digital marketing, and many more tasks. iWorker is a social enterprise that connects you to talented remote workers from countries in crisis. Most of their team come from Venezuela, a country facing dire economic circumstances. By hiring from iWorker, like we do, you'll get back some time for yourself and help to change a life. Find out more by listening to episode 20, where I spoke to co-founder John Miles, or you can look at their website, iworker.co, to find out more. Now back to the podcast. Well, that sounds like very wise advice to yourself. And just picking up on what you were mentioning there about becoming more comfortable with your identity and being happier to talk about your experiences and who you are as part of the LGBT community, I kind of want to turn our attention then to how you integrated that into the workplace. And as far as I understand, have created your own job for yourself.
Yes, I have kind of accidentally made a career for myself in this space. So yeah, when I started in that initial role as sort of an admin assistant, I had the opportunity randomly to speak to the CEO of the company at the time about their inclusion policies. And a lot of the conversations, it was a sort of roundtable discussion, and it was pretty much all focused on gender and women in the workplace. And I kind of sheepishly put my hand up because I was very, very new to the office and said, oh, I'm actually here to speak about LGBT inclusion, not gender inclusion. And I was wondering why there's nothing here about that and why there's no work on that. And he kind of thought about it and sort of admitted that it wasn't that they weren't passionate about it, it just was that they'd never thought about it before. So that if I wanted to see that in the workplace, I should go ahead and create it. And so with absolutely no prior experience or knowledge on how I could possibly create an LGBT inclusive workplace, I set to work and I set up the organization's first LGBT network for staff, because that was really what I was looking for. I was looking for that sense of community and that sense of belonging. And so it wasn't there. So I created it. And over the coming years, I became not just the person to speak to about LGBT inclusion, but about diversity, equity, and inclusion across the board. And very quickly in the background, I was trying to upskill myself because I was getting questions from quite senior members of the organization about things I had no knowledge of at all. So I was very quickly going away, finding the answers and then coming back. And over the course of a couple of years, sort of that grew from just a couple of emails here and there to a constant influx of requests for guidance and consultation on different aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion, to the point where it did become a full-time role in itself. And that's kind of what's led me to where I am today, where I am not only leading, but creating and then leading the implementation of the diversity strategy for the organization. So yeah, it was an accident, but a very happy accident, because it's something I care so passionately about. And it's not a role that I ever could have imagined myself in whilst sitting quite unhappily doing that law degree a few years ago.
So you created the ideal job for yourself through really following your interests and being prepared to back yourself in a way and going and learning more about diversity, equity, and inclusion to help implement that in the workplace. I'm wondering, were there any things from your law degree and the things you learned during that experience that you were able to draw upon that have helped you to be effective in the workplace today?
Yeah, I think although I sort of joke about not loving the topic and it not being a career path that I wanted to follow, there was definitely a number of skills that have been useful to me. I think thinking analytically, being able to structure an argument, being able to structure a proposition, particularly at the point where creating a job spec for myself and then presenting that back to the organization, that really requires quite a lot of courage in your convictions and courage in yourself and presenting your side of a perspective and sticking by that. So for sure that comes in very handy, and I probably use it more than I realize. And I think also that analytical piece, so much of what we do is data driven and it's founded in fact. There's a lot of storytelling, there's a lot of anecdote, but at the end of the day, it sort of does come down to facts and being able to propose those in sort of a structured manner. So that definitely comes in handy from time to time.
And how do you measure your success of your achievements within that organisation today?
A very interesting question. I think it's the $1 million question. If anyone's listening and knows exactly how to measure success in DEI, I would love to hear it. I think it's the one that everyone's trying to tackle because it's so challenging to measure something that's so holistic, something like an inclusive culture or the feeling of belonging, to measure that down to like one very specific statistic or data point. And so for me, it's kind of looking across the board at a number of different data points and sort of slow progress over time, rather than having sort of a tick box, yep, we've done it. For me, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's a journey. We're back to sort of the journey analogy again, but it is an ongoing journey. It's ongoing progress. It's not something that has an end goal. I guess the end goal would be to do myself out of a job. So I guess ultimate success would be the role that I'm in is no longer required. But whilst we're sort of on that journey, it's just about constantly adapting, changing to new language, changing to new legal guidance that comes out, policies, changing behavior, and then also adapting to the outside environment as well. So I don't think there's one marker of success, but more just sort of reviewing it as a whole and the experience that people within the organization are having and whether that's positive and they feel included or not.
I guess from what you're saying is you're pointing to the difficulties and the challenges that any organisation has in measuring success and impact within the organisation. I'm wondering also about you personally. You've created a job out of nothing, it'd be fair to say. It didn't exist before. And you, like many other people, can find it challenging to measure the impact and the effectiveness within the organisation. And yet each of us has to keep motivated on a daily basis. So I'm wondering if you ever look back and reflect and think about what your own personal measures of success are.
Yeah, I think I don't do that enough, but it's definitely something that we should all do a lot more of. For me, a massive point of reflection this year was Pride Month. So Pride Month every year falls in June for most countries. And it always, for me, is quite a milestone of looking back on the previous years and where I was for Pride Month the year before. So whilst diversity, equity, and inclusion across the board is a lot more than just LGBT inclusion, with my blog and with my niche and my personal experiences, Pride has always been kind of a marker of, oh, wow, here's where I was 1 year ago at Pride or 5 years ago at Pride. And so if I think back to 5 or 6 years ago, I attended Edinburgh Pride by myself. I got a bus into town and I just went and I stood on the sidelines and I just watched, because I was like, this is very new to me. I don't know what this is going to be like. Fast forward a year, I was there with 3 other colleagues from the organisation, because I'd roped 3 people into coming along with me and volunteering on behalf of a charity. The year after that, we were there as an organisation of maybe 20 or so people. The year after that, we had staff from 4 or 5 offices globally attending their local prides on behalf of the organisation. Then last year, I actually hosted a Pride webinar because, the world shut down. And so that in-person attendance wasn't possible, but we reached over 300 people around the world discussing the intersection of LGBT travel and the LGBT identity. And so Pride for me is always that marker of, oh, where was I a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and where am I now? And I think that I should probably do better at marking that more than once a year. But for me, Pride is always that moment of reflection of how far I've come and how confident I am now in speaking about it. Because this year it was the first time I spoke out to other organisations and educated other organisations on how to be inclusive and the importance of LGBT inclusion. So kind of moved from being the learner into educating others as well. So that was a big step.
Well, that's just a lovely example of the journey that you've made for yourself and one way of measuring success and impact that you've had and reflecting back on it. For any of our listeners that perhaps want to create a more inclusive and diverse workplace or community, whatever way they're engaging with others, but they, perhaps like you at the outset, are a little bit nervous, they don't quite know where to start, even just thinking about what language to use, let alone anything else. What would be some of the things that you've learned along the way that would maybe be helpful for them to take that first step?
Yeah, I think it's not being afraid to fail, because it's not something you're always going to get correct, and understanding that everybody is human. So we're not all perfect. Sometimes we're going to slip up. Sometimes we're going to use the wrong language. But for me, it's always intent over anything else. So you can always tell when someone is approaching something with the right intention, even if you use the wrong language or you slip up and say a word that's perhaps not as inclusive as it could be. The intention always shines through. And so just trying to be as inclusive as possible is always the best place to start. And also just self-education. There's a lot of pressure on minority groups, whether it's in the LGBT space or ethnicity or disability, to educate everybody on that experience. And so if you want to be an ally, it's taking that time to educate yourself, listen to podcasts or watch TED Talks or read books or watch films, whatever sort of format you prefer to be educated in. Taking the time to self-educate takes the pressure off those minority communities that are already under a lot of pressure to do that educating themselves, or seek out people who are actively trying to educate. So I'm happy to educate. I've put myself out there. I think that's very different to asking a colleague who's maybe not offered up that information about themselves to take on the onus of educating you. So yeah, I would say don't be afraid to fail, intent first, and self-educate and seek out those resources for yourself.
Well, I think so far you've given us a lovely example of those 3 words that we started with, authentic, queer and unstoppable, and how you've described your experience to date, Jenna. And I'm delighted that you're also willing and offering to educate any of our listeners who want to learn more. One of the things I'll put to you, and not for necessarily answering now, and I'll be interested if you will be willing to have a conversation with us offline about this, is one of the things we try to do on the podcast is to be inclusive. And we always seek to have diverse guests that we're interviewing and having conversations with. So maybe you can cast your expert eye over our strategy and see if we can learn something from you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually one that I realize that you and I are on camera right now, so we can see it for ourselves, but something I should have audibly said at the start as well. And I think one thing that would be great for a podcast is to share your pronouns at the beginning of when you're speaking, because particularly for the LGBT community, if you share your pronouns at the beginning, it opens up a safe space for anyone else to share their pronouns. And so it's a super simple thing to do if you're comfortable doing it, to share your pronouns. So my pronouns are she and her. And that just creates that space for anyone that you might be speaking to who might have pronouns that are not obvious or that you might not have assumed, to be able to share those back with you. And so that's definitely a practice I always try and stick to. And I think I've slipped up today because they're on our screen so we can see them, but the rest of the listeners can't see them. So that's definitely one that I would always encourage people to try and practice.
Well, that's brilliant. We're learning something already, and we can include that in the future with our recordings. Thank you for that one, Jenna.
Problem.
So if people want to find out more about the things that you've learned and to learn more about you and your travels and your work, how might they do that on social media?
So I'm very active on social media along with my blog, on Instagram mainly at the Jenna Way. So that was a name that I was, I guess that's a little bit of my journey, the Jenna Way. And that's where I am on Instagram. I speak a lot about being LGBT and my travels over there. And you get a little bit of insight into our van building as well as a bonus. And then on LinkedIn, I share more around the professional side of inclusion in the workplace. And I'm Jenna Howieson on LinkedIn. And then my blog is also thejennaway.com. And that's kind of a combination of my travel, LGBT inclusion, and sort of wider diversity, equity, and inclusion topics as well. So those are my three main things. I'm pretty much the Jenna Way everywhere.
And if there was one piece of advice that you would want to give yourself, if you look back at the 16-year-old Jenna and was to give her some advice, what would you say to her?
Oh, I think I would definitely tell her not to worry about what other people think. I definitely wasn't someone that was popular in high school. I didn't really fit in. But I think that by staying true to myself, staying independent and staying authentic, so that word again, it's led me to where I am today. And if I had spent more energy trying to fit in, I definitely wouldn't have followed the journey that I did and taken so many solo adventures and been ready to speak up for myself. So stay true to yourself and just follow what you're passionate about and don't worry too much about what other people are thinking, because it will work out in the end.
Well, that's a wonderful way to end our conversation today, Jenna. You've given us a lot to think about. You've given us some very practical tips and some wonderful stories to illustrate your journey. So thank you so much for taking the time to have a conversation with us today.
Thank you so much. It was great to chat to you.
So I hope you were inspired and educated by Jenna's messages. It made me think about how we can be more inclusive on the podcast. You'll find transcriptions of this and all the other episodes on the website, accesstoinspiration.org. Why not look us up on social media? We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And before I go, remember to take our impact survey or leave us a voice note about the impact that this podcast has had on you. You'll find details on the show notes and the website. Next time, I'll be speaking to Ronald Paredes, an artist and graphic designer from Caracas, whose aim is to help others rediscover their creativity. I hope you will join us then.